Hey everybody, this is Harry. Welcome to Creative Goo. Restarting tonight at 6:15 after some technical difficulties. If not, I'm just going to continue. Hopefully there's sound and we're just going to make this work. So I'm talking about figure painting. I'm going to actually move to another camera and I'm not going to cover what I covered except in really quick terms. You've got a miniature you've bought or you've printed. You need to prime it after you clean it, and then once it's primed, you want to think about how you're going to paint it. So let me get to that screen and we can talk about how you paint it. So hopefully if you guys are out there in the chat room, give me a thumbs up if you can hear. See if it's working. I'm at least getting visual. So we're going to keep going. So again, let me talk about miniatures and paint. So I'm going to stop and go down memory lane and show you guys some of the changes in miniatures and the paints that you would use. So if we look at this miniature here, this is from the 80s. It's a Raoul Partha miniature, and I painted it with the paints of the day. There were Raoul Partha paints, and there were model paints, and this is the miniature that I ended up with. It still holds together. It still looks okay. One of the things you'll notice when I show you some others, it's actually pretty small. So this would be like a 28 or 25 millimeter scale miniature, but that's what we played with back in the day. Here's another one from another company, and you can see it's already bigger. And this is a Grenadier model, and they were more 28. He's crouching and he's as tall as the other model. And again, I'm painting with acrylic paints and then sealing it. So it's held together pretty well. And these are 40-year-old miniatures, right? And so then I moved into the next decade, so the 90s, and here's a dwarf. Let me go back to that original character, and you can see he's as big as this human as a dwarf. Now, dwarves are stocky and big. They're just not as tall, but this one's a pretty good one. I don't remember the name of the manufacturer. They produce some really cool dwarves, and I'm a big fan. So this particular miniature is painted with craft paint, like you would get from Michael's or Hobby Lobby or something like that. So you can get good results with craft paint. The same thing that happens with other paints, though, is it's going to be thick. And so let me show you what I mean. This is the kind of craft paint I used. I still use craft paint for scenery and things like that because it's inexpensive, right? So you can take advantage of those prices, or if I'm doing ornaments and things like that. So if I can get it to focus, for some reason it's not focusing. So that's the dwarf. So let me move out of screen and pull up something. A little later in that same decade, closer to 2000s, this is from Rackham. And I went back to painting with paints designed for miniatures. And because it's got a smaller pigment in it, you can get smoother results. And I'm really happy with how this turned out. And it's based on a dwarf. And let's go back to scale. Its head's already bigger than the head on my other dwarf. But it's okay because it's this weird worm creature. I had a lot of fun painting these. I entered them in a painting competition at the time and didn't get anything. I was disappointed. Another 10 years later, so now we're less than 20 years ago. Now this is using a new kind of paint that was available from Privateer Press. It's still for sale, and it's called P3. And one of the reasons I like it is because the pigment's liquid, where on all these other paints, it's using flecks of color that's in the paint, and when those flecks dry, it provides color, where this P3 paint is using a liquid pigment, so you get really smooth results. I entered this in a painting competition with his buddies, and I got a bronze medal, so I did okay. That's the best I've ever done, is that bronze. But really happy with the results of this miniature and his buddies. It was 6 miniatures in total, I think, for the crew. It wasn't long after that I started other materials. So This is actually two-part epoxy that I sculpted by hand and then primed and painted. So again, you can use paint on a similar material and get the same results. I get a lot of questions on what paint to use on 3D printed products, and you can use any paint. The primer is the most important step, and then your paints are going to work normally. The only danger is with those Reaper Bones miniatures. Their plastic reacts to rattle can paint. The chemicals that are providing propellant will ruin the miniature, and the paint will get all sticky and tacky, and you can't get rid of it. You've basically ruined the miniature. So what you want to do is use a airbrush, like Geeky suggested before my technology died. You can also do that, or you can use just brush it on by hand. Now, these two miniatures are mine too, but they're actually metal. So you can see the bottom, they're metal. These I sculpted for a company that's no longer in business. Unfortunately, there was a tragedy in the family. But again, the metal you can paint and you can get really good results. So this is when I started sculpting by hand. And then about 10 years ago, I started sculpting and 3D printing with my own printer. And so this, similar paint techniques, but I just wanted to show you that you can, with a resin print, you can get really nice results once it's printed and you prep it the same way. So I'm really, really happy with that. Something came up on Facebook today about Frank Frazetta. He's an artist that I just love, and I have books of his. They're so worn out because I would just page through and get inspiration from. There was a company that got permission to create miniatures, and I supported their Kickstarter, and this is the Death Dealer. And I was still using some of those traditional techniques, but you can see in 3D, this Death Dealer came out pretty wicked. So he's on a display case shelf in my home. I'm really happy with how he turned out. Now, this is another 3D print from, I was a Patreon supporter, and I printed it myself. And then you can see this, however, is using a new kind of paint. And it's called speed painting or contrast paints. I'm going to show you the paints in a second. And you can get really good results really fast. That's the whole concept. And it allows you to be a good painter without having a ton of practice. And that's what I'm going to try and show you here today. And so that's with those kind of paints. And here's another example of a model I did for one of the members of the GUI community. It's the character, his horse, his dog, and a little dimensional slinker with a mustache. And he's painted with that contrast paint. So except for like the face on the dog, I did some extra details. I did some extra highlighting on the horse to make it look better. But again, you start with that contrast paint and you get really, really good results. And I'll talk through that. And so I just wanted to show you the kind of results you get with the different types of paint available, from the craft paint all the way through to this type of paint. So I showed a minute ago the craft paint. So you can use this. You thin it down a lot, but the flecks of color are large in comparison to the hobby paint that you would get. Some other companies that I use and I like, here's Vallejo. They have game color and they have model color paints, and they're all really good for miniatures. And so I have quite a bit of their paint. I have, where did it go? I also have Reaper paints. I used to use their tricolor paints a lot. I don't have one handy. And then here's an example of the Privateer Press paint. And again, this paint has liquid pigment instead of flecks. And so this, you get really good results. Vallejo, Belinda, yes, is a very, very good paint product and a paint company. They're really high quality, and they make paintbrushes and stuff too. So there's lots of choices out there. Citadel makes a full paint line. That's the paint company from Games Workshop. And so most game stores will have the Citadel paints. They won't all have P3 Privateer Press paint. They won't all have Reaper paints. They won't all have Vallejo. So depending on your local area, the paints available may be limited. And so it's okay to use what you find. And then Army Painter now has a full line of paint. Now, the final paint I want to talk about is Citadel, right? So here's, they call it contrast. Let's see if I can get it to focus. Come on. Move out. Move in. There we go. So this is contrast. And so it's labeled specifically contrast. So when you buy, you have to be careful that what you're buying. They have foundation paints. They have washes. They have lots of, but all the jars and bottles look the same. So you have to be careful what you buy. And they have a full set of different colors. Like this is the snakebite leather. There's another one of my favorites is this Black Templar, and they also have this a couple of different flesh tones. Guilliman's a type of character in Games Workshop, so all of them have Black Templar as a type of 40K Space Marine, and, so they use their intellectual property for the names of their paints. So let me show you a couple of miniatures I'm going to work on today to talk about techniques, right? So we've got that Alphinius Goo with his balloon of a mimic, and on this creature that's a three-headed chimera. So I'll probably put some paint on him to show you. And I have a model that some of you might have seen. This is a snail mage by the name of Escargot. I'll put some paint on him, and I have him in two sizes, a medium size and the actual really small. Let me grab a human miniature to show you. So this is that thief from the 80s and the very small snail dude. So I can put paint on him too to show you. And then I might be testing just to show you some metallics on this very large troll. We'll see how much we can do, how much we can do in today's show. So one of the things I wanted to tell everybody is, so if I look at these miniatures, I'm holding my hand, I can paint with the brush. I'm not going to talk about brushes today. I want to talk about techniques. But if I paint him with the brush, that's great. But I got my fingers all over it, and it's going to be easy to ruin it. And so you can get tools to hold it. So I bought these at a convention a couple of years ago, and this is a holder that you could buy. And this is common to ones where you would have your thumb on the top, and so you're never touching the miniature as you're painting it. And you can see, let me move out, move back in. Talon Games made this one. It's laser cut MDF fiberboard. And then here's another one where you just hold it in your fist and the miniature sits on top. I bought them. I never use them. So they're super cool. And Games Workshop makes a version. There's 3D print designs you can print. I found the easiest thing for me, if you don't recognize this, you've never taken a pill in your life. So pill bottles have the ones that have a smooth top are fit great in my hand. And with a little blue tack, I can stick the miniature. And then again, I never touch the miniature. I can paint it. And I have dozens of them. And that blue tack just lasts over and over and over again. And then even that big model of that troll, he's on a pill cap, and he's really big. So you can see I can barely fit him in camera. And I can hold this. Now, sometimes I will touch the base, so I usually paint the base first so I can put my hands on it and get to it. But I only need to do that when it's a very large miniature. And a large miniature like this wouldn't even fit on that other product. But I know people that swear by those grip-based holders. So your mileage may vary. Let me go ahead and put Alphinius and the larger Escargot onto pill tops. And one of the reasons I share all these things is because there was a time when I didn't have much money. I mean, and this was what I wanted to do to relax. And so lots of money saving things. So I spend money on the things that matter, like the brushes and the paint. But even when I didn't have the money, I used that craft paint and still got good results. So you can do that. So let's see what I want to do first. So the first thing I want to do is, well, let me talk about palettes. So it's another thing that you can spend money on. You can buy a piece of plastic and put your paint on that, like from the craft store. You can use a tile that has that smooth on the top, and you can wash that off when you finish painting. I use that a lot. And then there's this concept of a wet palette. So this is the Privateer Press wet palette, and you open it up. Let me show you. And there's a foam material underneath, and then you put this parchment paper, and you can actually keep the paint wet. This one's old, but you can keep the paint wet for a really, really long time by storing it in this wet palette. And you can make your own. It's just a plastic tray. There's foam. There's online resources on what foam to use. And this is just parchment paper. I have Privateer Press special paper, as you can see, but you can just buy parchment paper and cut it to size for whatever you have. So, yes, Phantom. So the question is, do I use poster tack to attach the minis? That's exactly what I use. And this tack I've been using for years, so I never have to replace it. At least I haven't yet. I'm still on the same packet of blue tack that I bought probably 5 years ago. Let's see. So that's the palette. And then I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember these. So this is actually what I use for a palette most of the time. It's an old rewritable CD. I have tons of them. I used to have a bunch of AOL CDs and other CDs like that, and I've actually finally gone through them all. And this is what I use. And because it's reflective, I actually get a really good feel for the actual color when I thin it out. So I like the reflective. A lot of people like white. And so it's just personal preference. And you could use the side that doesn't reflect as much. So that's the palette I use. And then these paints, these contrast paints, you actually paint right out of the bottle. So you actually don't need a palette for these. Now, the other paints that are similar, I didn't show you yet. This is speed paint from Army Painter. It's the same concept. What speed paints are is one coat of paint to get your shading and your highlighting. And so that's what I'm going to show a little bit today. But before I talk about shading and highlighting, I want to talk about eyes, because that's what bothers everybody. So let's look at this little itty bitty dude. And does he have eyes? Well, if you see the bigger dude, it's probably easier to see. He has one eye right there. And this little itty bitty dude has, he went out of focus. Let me go out, let the camera work. There we go. He has a little bitty eye right there. And that's still even bigger than a human eye on a miniature. But I'm going to start with his eye so I can show you what I do. The technique when I teach new people how to paint is paint the eyes first. And so I'm going to get a little paintbrush, and I'm using this model color from Vallejo, this white, to start with the white. And I'm going to put some on my palette. I'm going to take off my glasses because I see better up close without my glasses on. Not that you guys can see my face or anything. I need to thin it. One thing when you take paint out of a bottle, use an old brush usually to take the paint out so it doesn't get in your bristles or in the base of your paintbrush. But you always want to thin your paint, except these speed paints where you don't thin them, you use them right out of the bottle. But for all the traditional painting techniques, you want to thin it out. So let me see if I can do it and have the camera show you what I'm doing. So I'm just trying to capture the white in this dude's eyes. I also have a magnifying headset. You see, the nerds wear. But what I found that gives me just as good a results is reading glasses, and you just pick a really high magnification. So because he's primered white, and the reason he's primered white is because of the speed paint, it's best to have a very light color. But I wanted to get that white in there because I'm going to paint around it. So I've got the eye. And guess what? It didn't matter if I made a mistake or brushed paint in the wrong place, anything like that, because it's first, right? And then the next thing I'm going to do, a technique I mentioned in another show, is put the pupil in. And I'm going to use a pen, right? It's perfectly round like a pupil. You don't have to worry too much about where the pigment, it's going to go right where you want it to go. And even with this, I make mistakes, and I'm probably going to make a mistake here because there's a camera between me and the model. So look how easy that was. I now have an eye. And I didn't have to work that hard, right? Now you can do that same pupil with paint and black and a detail brush, but and I do that occasionally, but usually only when it's a bigger creature and it has big eyes, right? And that's a great point, Geeky. Is light is critical. I have extra light in the room here, but it's still not as bright as I like it to be. I have very good lights around where I'm painting. The more light and the better the light, the better your results. If you're using incandescent bulbs, you want daylight bulbs because it's the best real light you're going to get unless you can paint outside or near a good window. But light's really important. That's a great point. And so I'm going to go ahead and do the other piece that you want to do if you want. So this is good enough for an eye for 99% of everybody, right? Is because, remember, this is going to be at the tabletop, normally looked at from 3 feet away, right? So keep that in mind when you're painting, that to the techniques that you use. I've got lots of miniatures that don't have eyes at all because it didn't matter. Now, if it's, something that I want people to pick up and look at, I might have to move real close. So pardon me, because I don't have enough light actually to see. So I'm going to move away just for a second, and then I'll come back and explain. Don't have enough paint on my brush. It doesn't want to work. What I'm trying to do is put the reflection in the eye. So where there's black, you want to put a little white dot on the model so that it looks very, very real. And it's a simple technique that I can't get my brush to cooperate. It's just not cooperating. And it's because I'm on camera and because I had technical difficulties. It's actually changing the whole model. So, but that's the concept. So you don't have to do that. But I do that a lot. So I'll show you on this model so you can see there's a little dot right there that adds a reflection. And that really makes the eyes of the miniature pop. And that's going to separate you from any other painter. Only if you're really careful, that's what you do. Right? So that's one way to do it. And like I said, that's super simple. I'm going to show you another technique that's even easier. So I'm going to go, let's see, can I do it with Alphinius here? I'll start with the black, actually. So this is the other thing I teach people, especially if their hand's a little shaky. Since we're starting on the face first, let me get focus. And all you do, you're actually doing just a vertical line. My pen's actually too big. Let me find some black paint. Give me a second. It'll be easier to show with the brush because the brush has more flexibility to it. As I explode this paint on the board. No, I don't want to do that. Ruin my computer with that. So I'm just putting some black paint on my palette off screen. And let me thin it a little bit. One thing you'll notice is it's not like it's that small of a paintbrush, but what you need is, in my opinion, what you need is a round brush. Oh, hopefully I didn't lose my camera. You want a round brush that comes to a point. So let's see if I can make the magic work on this guy. Come on. And what you want to do is just draw a straight line or paint a straight line. And he's got a very inset eye. And it looks like a clown. But that's okay, because we're going to make those clown things go away. Because it's really easy to paint in straight lines. All right, so there's black. And you can see he looks like a clown. I'm sorry the camera is not focusing. There we go. All right. Then I would do straight lines of white. And you'd hold the miniature where it's comfortable to do the straight line. So I'm going to do it from the side. And I'm going to do white on each side of the black. And the camera is just not my friend today. So you're getting the idea. Now I have this white and black. Well, then the next thing I do, I'm going to do it with a brown because I have a brown handy. And because I'm not using a wet palette, I have to bring the paint out one little bit at a time because it will dry on me. So once you have the eyes done as big or as small as you want, I'm going to do it from the side again. And I'm going to paint across the top my flesh tone. In this case, I'm just using brown. And then I'm doing that under his eye till the black goes away. And now I have, just on that one side, an eye. Let me actually paint more so you really get the effect. If I had more time, I would have picked miniatures that made it showcase easier. But I'm a masochist. Yeah, and I just stuck the paint right in his eye. But you should still be able to see the black. I covered up the white. So you basically do rectangles. So you do a rectangle up and down for the black, 2 rectangles for the white, and then you do rectangles around it for the skin tone, and you now have an easy eye. If I had more practice painting with the camera between me and the miniature, it would look a lot better. So, but this shows you the idea, and it looks like a mask now until you paint the rest of the model. And but that's the eye technique. So those are two ways you can do eyes. And then now I want to show you what contrast paint is. So normally when you paint a miniature, you were doing what I was just doing. You put down a base coat of that brown. Then you get a darker brown to shade in the underneath and shade in the recesses. And then you get a lighter brown and highlight the upper areas. Well, that takes at least 3 steps or more. So I've got this snail here, and I have this flesh tone, right? I'm going to shake it up a little bit, move my palette so I don't stick my paint in paint, and open the lid, get a bigger brush, and with this paint, you can see I have a lot of paint on the brush. I'm just going to paint over this miniature. And you can be, you want to be careful not to paint anything else, but everywhere you have this flesh tone, you just want to paint it with this color. And the only technique is to just carefully brush so you don't put this color on his shell, for example. You want to avoid the shell. You just want the sluggy parts. And there's still a little bit of chemical on this miniature. I probably didn't clean it completely because I'm lazy. I think I mentioned that earlier. And I pay the price for not doing it the right way. A lot of chemicals you work with, like alcohol or the sprays and things, they have a property that repels water. And since these are water-based paints, that's what's happening, is it's being repelled. And so if you haven't cleaned it well enough, the water will your paint will pull away where there's still residue, and that property will go through even your primer. The chemical reaction stays, and that's why soapy water works the best. So I'm being super careful around his eyes because I didn't actually paint his eyes first in this guy's case because I want to keep the show on time. Even because of my technical difficulties at the beginning. I apologize to everybody. Thanks for hanging out and staying with me through thick and thin. I don't know how Camera Mandy's gonna put this on YouTube with all those little short problems, but we'll figure it out. So I'm going to call that good, and I'm going to let it sit for just a minute. If you're painting a miniature, just a single miniature at one time, you can dry the paint by blowing on it or even with an air dryer. That works with paints like this because they don't usually move once you get it on the model. This contrast paint and similar paints, they're actually very, very thin and they're designed to run a bit. And you can see already that dark pigment has gone into the recesses of this model to shade it and pulled away from the upper parts and the edges of the model to highlight it. So in one coat, I have the flesh of a, what do you call it? A magic snail, an escargot, a mollusk, right? So, what you need me to move down a bit? I'm not sure I understand. Was I painting too high up? So I'm going to show you a similar paint. This is the speed paint from Army Painter. This is the company Army Painter. And these are available. What's cool about Army Painter is they've made metallics. So nobody else right now has a metallic speed paint because it didn't work. The properties that make the paint look like metal were anti speed paint, where it ran into the recesses and stuff. So I'm going to take off the hand of this giant troll so I can work with it. And he's got this anchor, so I'm going to paint that anchor in the metal. And we'll see how that does. Again, I can use a very large brush. And you can, depending on the brush, I'll talk about brushes and my passion for good paintbrushes another day. But a good paintbrush that's big, let's see if I can get it in here, that's big, can come to a point and you can do very good detail. Like with this brush, it's such high quality, it'll come to a point and I can paint details pretty well. And so I can use this same paintbrush for a significant portion. Got to try and hold it in frame, I'm sorry. So the metallic take a little bit longer to dry in this speed paint. So really quickly, you can see already, even with the silver paint, some darker paint's getting underneath and some lighter is coming on top. So depending on what you want in your metallic paint, you could be done here too. Like you can clearly see the scratches in this anchor here and here, the detail around this extra bracket here, and then around the rivets. So you could call this done and feel good about it. Now you could still weather it and add detail if you wanted to, but with one coat, you're getting great results. So you don't have to learn how to perfectly feather or some of the other really big techniques that professional painters use to get really good results. And a lot of my friends that walked away from painting because it was just taking so long to finish with these speed paints and contrast paints have come back to the hobby because it's so much fun to paint again and you get really good results without having to worry about those other techniques. So trying to keep it in frame. So you can see how fast I was able to paint this anchor, right? And so this is one of the things I wanted to share in the episode today, that you don't have to be a master to get really nice results. And if you just have a steady hand around like where his fist is, you're doing really well. And you don't have to stress so much. Painting miniatures is a fun hobby. It doesn't have to be so stressful that you think it's art, right? So you get really good results. So you can see that paint works really, really well. So yeah, Belinda, you make a great point about metallics. It's often best to have a separate set of brushes for your metallic paints than for your other paints, because that metallic in the paint does affect your brush. And what it affects is, let me show you, let me move my beautiful new anchor. I really like how that turned out. So I'm loving that. Got some paint on my palette here. Ruining my thing. So this part here, this metal part is a ferrule, I think is how it's pronounced. And so the bristles are glued in here at the edge. And if paint gets in there, it'll ruin this brush, because what it does is it forces the bristles apart. And then also some very small bits of paint can get lodged inside the bristles, and you end up with a brush, even a really fancy one, that looks like this. Okay, you can see it's forced apart. There's broken bits. And other problems, because I'm very, very hard on my brushes. But you should know this brush is over 10 years old. And so I've been painting with it for a very, very long time. So it depends on what you want out of a brush. But just be aware of those things. And so after painting, even though you're rinsing the brush every time between colors, after you paint, clean the brushes, right? And the metallic brushes, it's best to have be a separate set of brushes for that. And then, here's, some other brushes that I have. This one's not the really fancy brush, but it works pretty well. And then here's a brush, just really quick, that I use for dry brushing, and that's its purpose. And so it has a different type of bristle. But I really need to spend a good 20 minutes just talking about brushes. There's lots of different brushes. Let me go back to where you can see me. So hopefully you guys had some fun watching me paint in a really poor way. So you can see in this camera, I've got the flesh tone or whatever, snail tone, shaded and highlighted in one coat. And I could do a shade and highlight on the shell, a shade and highlight right on his staff, maybe do something for the thing on top, paint his eye. That miniature's done, right? So, that I love contrast paints and I love the speed paints. And then here you can see, even on this camera, how cool that one coat of brush steel or whatever it's called turned out, where you can get the detail and it looks like metal. And if I wanted to weather it or something like that, I can still do that. But one coat and I have basically what I need. So any questions from those of you on the stream? The eye techniques didn't really come through that well. I might do another session on eyes with a bigger miniature just so I can show you the process without trying to do it on a very small miniature. I'll try and make that happen. If people are interested in seeing me paint live, happy to try and do that. So I had a really good time talking about one of my passions, which is painting miniatures. Based on what you saw, I have miniatures going back over 40 years. I still use them at the game table. I have a lot of them on display. It's just been a fun journey over the last 40 years. And my eyesight's not as good as it used to be, and being able to get really nice results, even with my bad eyes, because of the new technology available in paint and the quality of brushes and the availability of learning some of these techniques on the internet has really kept my passion alive for painting miniatures. So I sculpt, I build models, I do all that stuff. But I hope this was a good episode, even with all the technical flaws. And hope you guys have a great evening. And I will catch up with everybody next week. And hopefully see some of you in Denver in a month when we go to Genghis Khan. Take care, everybody.